All right, so moving on. Like I said, Texas is number 2 in the terrible 10. So this is ITEP, Institute for Taxation and Economic Policy. You'll see that Texas has 13%, 13 point, I thought that's a 9, 13% of the 20th poorest. 13% of our overall population is in the 20th poorest. We do have no income tax, and that's characteristic of having a high regressive tax policy scheme. No flat rate income tax, lack of refundable credits, which means we don't have a lot of money coming back to us at the end of the year, and we have a high reliance on sales and excise taxes and a high reliance on our property tax value as well. Okay, those are all things that are very characteristic of regressive tax schemes. So when we look at other sources of revenue that the state uses to create its overall general revenue budget, we have a mixture of new taxes, toll roads, increased tuition and fees to supplement some of our taxation as we have a tax fatigue. Like I said, federal grants take a lot of percentage of our overall revenue, about 33% of last state budget revenue. That's increased from less than 25% in the early 80s. But federal money does not come without strings, okay? There's usually earmarked for a specific program or specific project. Those are not just discretionable funds that we could use for anything. They have specific earmarks. There's also licensing of business and professional fees, income from the permanent school fund on land use, lottery funds, things like that. Lottery funds are controversial, but they are constitutionally protected because there's no plan to replace that revenue. And they do go to education and veterans programs. Plus, we all like the lottery. Who hasn't played the lottery? Probably a lot of y'all because you're so young. You should play the lottery. It's fun. All right. So let's look, kind of shifting gears from taxation into how we spend and create a budget. In Texas, we have something called the Legislative Budget Board, which is similar to something that they have at the federal level, but they're the general architects behind our biennial budget, and they have tremendous political influence. Members of this include the Lieutenant Governor, Speaker of the House, and the chairs of legislative committees. It's important ones. They sometimes work with the Governor's Office of Budget Planning and Policy that helps develop the governor's budget, which we talked about at the beginning of the semester. But the Legislative Budget Board provides an analysis for the committees involved in the budgeting. They will tell us how much money we have to spend and where we ought to prioritize those funds. So this budget process is not too unsimilar to the federal legislative budget process. They send out appropriation requests to the agencies that draw from the General Revenue Fund in spring and summer. Then they will meet with those agencies to essentially propose why they should get this funding that they're asking for. The committees will then hold hearings on the requests from the budget that were sent out with the appropriation request. And then the chamber will vote on 12 different appropriation bills so essentially agencies will ask for money, they will lobby for it, and then they will hold hearings to determine if they're going to get those funds. Each appropriations agency gets an individual bill called an appropriations bill that will give them a certain amount of funds. And every budget process, the comptroller has to certify that the revenue exists in order to pay for that. The reason is that, Texas has a pay-as-you-go system, which means we cannot spend money that we don't have. We have to have a balanced budget every year, okay? So this is where line item veto allows the governor to reject certain appropriation spending bills if he or she does not agree with the amount of funds going to that particular agency. However, those can be overridden, as we all know. So, like I said, Texas always has to have constitutionally a balanced budget. We don't borrow money frequently. In fact, there was one time when, in order to keep Texas revenue funds in the black, they had to increase taxes substantially. So borrowing is limited except for during times of war or if there's a legislative emergency. A bill cannot be considered passed by the legislator unless the comptroller has authorized the amount of spending is available. Okay, so they can't pass any bill that is going to have a fiscal impact unless the comptroller has said that we have the money available to fund that particular bill. Okay, so look back here. This is when Glenn Hagar in 2016 certified the Texas state budget. This is a pretty user-friendly. They give this each time. They haven't had one for this year yet. It was certified on June 9th. This is the total number. $209.4 billion is how much the state will estimate that it will spend in the next 2 years on this 2016-17 budget. About $7,000 per, little over $7,000 per Texas resident. $106.6 billion from the General Revenue Fund, tax relief, where the money comes from, and then areas of the budget that receive the funds. You'll see that public education, higher education, transportation, and health and human services tends to get the most funds from this. Okay, so where does the money go? 3 items consume the most of the state budget, like I said: education and K through 12 education, higher education. Health and welfare together make about 74% of the budget, and transportation. So as the population has increased, so has our spending. Your health and human services accounts for about 1/3 of the state budget, although those are primarily funded with federal grants. Texas contributes significantly less than most states with regard to these services. We have a constitution that prohibits more than 1% of the state budget going towards welfare programs. So in terms of where we rank, near the bottom in terms of expenditures for health and human services. Also, this is a really great link. Let me open it up really quickly for you. From the Texas Tribune, that basically gives a breakdown of the Texas budget last biennial session. So if you want to give that a look through, it's pretty fun. So you can see here how much money public education, health and human services, higher education last fiscal year got slashed very heavily. Criminal justice and transportation. All right, so the last slide here talks about something that I'm sure everyone has heard about but doesn't know have a lot of information about. It's called the Rainy Day Fund. Formerly, the Rainy Day Fund is called the Economic Stabilization Fund. It was created in 1988, and this is what I was referring to. They created that when oil prices plummeted, forcing lawmakers to raise taxes. The state's EFC at the close of 2016 was $9.7 billion, and that is expected to increase substantially in the next fiscal year. It is about 18% of our general revenue expenditures, and it is nearly 3 times that of the national average of 6.5% among states with similar economic stabilization funds. We have the largest economic stabilization fund after 2016. Prior to 2016, we were the second largest, only after Alaska. Okay, and this is funded largely by revenue accounted for from oil and gas taxes. It accounts for about 85% of the revenue. In 2013 and 2014, we did have some amendments that authorized these amendments are going to expire, however. They authorized spending from the Economic Stabilization Fund specifically for emergency water and road projects, and that will expire in 2024. Okay, so if you want to remove money from the Economic Stabilization Fund, 2/3 vote is required for general spending, and then 3/5 under certain circumstances. Things like, I have it listed here in the notes. Oops, I'm sorry. Closed it. A budget deficit or a projected revenue shortfall. Those are going to require 3/5 spending. But we have extremely strong political pressure to not use money from the fund. It's, I think the last time we did was 2013, specifically for the water and road repairs. So that is all I have for you guys. Please, as you'll probably have discerned, there's still no baby. But please take the remainder of the time that we're not meeting face-to-face to do your campaign for governor. Please do not forget about that. I'll send out an announcement reminding y'all shortly. If you have any questions, feel free to contact me. Y'all, have a great weekend.